Illy Carter rode in just before dusk, the sky burning red behind the hills, like the land itself was wounded. 3 months on the trail had carved deeper lines into his face and hardened his hands, but all he wanted now was the quiet of his cabin and a clean place to sleep. As he dismounted, something felt wrong. The corral gate hung open, swaying gently in the wind, and his horse snorted uneasy. Illy rested his hand on his revolver and moved toward the cabin, boots slow on the dirt. The door was unlatched. He pushed it open with the barrel of his gun. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and crushed sage, not the stale emptiness he expected. The fire pit held fresh ash. Someone had been here. His heart began to pound as he stepped forward, every sense awake. Then he saw her. She lay on his bed, half covered by his blanket. Dark hair spread like ink across the pillow. For a moment he thought she was dead. Then her eyes snapped open. In a blur of movement, she reached beneath the blanket and came up with a knife, the blade catching the fading light. She was Apache. He knew that much at once. From the cut of her features to the beaded cord at her wrist, Illy froze. Slowly, he raised his hands and let the gun fall to the floor. He spoke, voice calm despite the fear crawling up his spine. But she did not understand his words. Her breathing was shallow, her grip on the knife trembling. As she shifted, he saw the blood soaked into his sheets. Dark and drying along her side, she tried to sit up and failed, a sharp breath escaping her lips. Pain broke through her defiance for just a second. Illy stepped closer, careful, showing his empty hands. He pointed to the wound, then to himself, then mimed, washing and binding it. She watched him, eyes sharp and suspicious, weighing her choices. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, carrying distant sounds that could have been riders or nothing at all. Illy understood the danger instantly. If soldiers found her here, they would not ask questions. If neighbors learned he was sheltering an Apache woman, they would turn on him just as fast. She lowered the knife slightly, not in trust, but in exhaustion. Illy took that as permission. As he knelt beside the bed, tearing cloth for bandages, he realized something had already shifted. This was no longer just his cabin, his land, his life. When he closed the door behind him that night, it was not to keep her in. It was to keep the world out. Morning came slow and pale, sunlight slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls. Illy woke in his chair by the fire, his back stiff and his eyes burning from too little sleep. The woman was still on his bed. She had not tried to run. That alone surprised him. Steam rose faintly from the pot of water he had kept warm through the night. And when she stirred, her hand went instinctively to the knife resting near her thigh. Illy spoke softly, though he knew she could not understand him. He held up the cloth he had used to clean her wound, now stained and drying, then pointed to the water. She watched him closely as he approached, every muscle tense, like a deer deciding whether to bolt when he changed the bandage. She did not cry out, but her jaw tightened, and a bead of sweat rolled down her temple. The wound was deep, torn by either a blade or a bullet. She should not have survived the night. When he finished, she said something in her own language, her voice low and steady. He did not know the words, but the sound of them stayed with him. She pointed to herself and spoke again. Nigh, then she gestured toward him, waiting. After a moment he understood. Illy, he said, tapping his chest. She repeated it once carefully, as if testing its weight. They shared food in silence. He offered bread and dried meat, and she accepted after smelling it, suspicion giving way to hunger. Outside, a hawk circled high above the prairie. The world looked the same as it always had. Yet Illy felt as though he was seeing it through new eyes. By midday, he rode out to check the fence line, leaving her alone with the door unlocked. He half expected to return to an empty cabin. Instead, he found her sitting by the fire, carving careful marks into a strip of wood with the tip of her knife. She glanced up when he entered, not startled, just watchful. The knife remained in her hand, but it no longer trembled. That evening, distant hoof beats echoed across the land. Ellie stiffened, listening. Nye noticed at once. She rose, moving toward the window, her body tense. Ellie shook his head and gestured for her to stay back. He knew the danger was growing. Soldiers had been moving through the territory for weeks now, hunting Apaches who had slipped away from the reservation. As night fell, Nye sang softly, a low, haunting melody that wrapped around the cabin like smoke. Ellie sat by the fire, staring into the flames, realizing the truth he had been avoiding. Harboring her was no longer an act of kindness. It was a choice, and choices he knew well always carried a price. The sound of hooves came just after sunrise, sharp and unmistakable. Ellie was outside splitting wood when his horse lifted its head and snorted. Nanty stepped out of the cabin behind him, her face already tight with warning. She did not need words to understand what was coming. From the rise beyond the corral, 3 riders appeared, blue coats catching the morning light. Soldiers, Ellie's stomach nodded. He set the axe down slowly and moved forward, forcing his shoulders to stay loose. I slipped back toward the trees, silent as breath, a bow already in her hand. Their eyes met for a brief second. He shook his head once, a plea. She paused, then vanished into the brush. The soldiers rode up, dust curling around their boots. Their leader was young, with a hard mouth and tired eyes. He asked polite questions at first. Had Ellie seen any Apaches, any strangers passing through? Ellie answered calmly, keeping his voice steady. He said no. He said he'd been alone for weeks. The lie tasted bitter, but he did not hesitate. One soldier dismounted and began to look around, his gaze lingering on the cabin door, the fresh tracks near the well. Ellie felt the weight of his rifle on his back, like a promise and a threat all at once. He stepped into the man's path, smiling thinly, offering coffee. The soldier hesitated, then waved him off and kept walking. A sudden crack split the air. The soldier's rifle discharged as he stumbled. Near the corral, the shot tearing into the dirt. In the same instant, Nanty's arrow flew from the trees, striking the ground at his feet. Chaos erupted, horses reared, one soldier shouted, another raised his weapon toward the trees. Ellie moved without thinking. He swung his rifle up and fired into the air, then planted himself between the soldiers and the brush. He shouted for them to stop. His voice roar. The leader turned on him, fury blazing, accusing him of hiding an Apache woman. Ellie did not deny it. The standoff stretched heavy and dangerous. Finally, one soldier lay wounded, not by Ellie's hand, but from being thrown when his horse bolted. Blood darkened the dust. The leader cursed, realizing the situation had spun beyond control. With a final glare, he ordered a retreat, warning Ellie that they would return. When the riders disappeared over the ridge, the prairie fell silent again. Nanty emerged slowly, bow lowered. She touched Ellie's arm, her expression grave. She spoke a single word he understood without translation. Come. That night, Ellie sat alone in his cabin, staring at the walls that had once meant safety. By dawn, he knew one thing with certainty. There was no going back. The fire was already dying when Ellie made his decision. The cabin felt smaller than it ever had, its walls closing in as if they knew he was about to leave. Outside, the stars stretched across the sky in cold, endless silence. Nye sat across from him, her dark eyes steady, waiting. She had not pressed him. She had only spoken that one word and trusted him to understand. Before dawn, Ellie buried what little he could not carry. His mother's tin locket went beneath the old cotton wood along with a few coins, and the past he no longer had room for. The rest he burned. The cabin caught quickly, flames licking at the roof, smoke rising into the pale morning sky. Illy did not look back when the walls collapsed, that life was finished. They rode toward the mountains, keeping to the shallow valleys and dry washes where tracks were harder to follow. Nye led with quiet confidence, reading the land as if it spoke directly to her. Illy followed, learning when to ride and when to walk, when to stop and listen. Each mile carried him farther from the man he had been. By the third day, his body etched in ways it never had before, not from labor or hunger, but from the constant watchfulness. Nent I moved with ease, yet she always stayed close, slowing when he slowed, guiding without pride. At night they shared small fires hidden among rocks, speaking little. She taught him signs and gestures, and he taught her words, pointing to the stars, the horse, the fire himself. When they reached her people, there was no celebration. The elders watched him with cautious eyes. Measuring his worth, Illy felt their judgment and accepted it. It was a stranger, a risk. And I stood beside him, silent but unyielding. Seasons turned. Illy learned to hunt without waste, to listen before acting, to wait. He learned that strength did not always come from standing alone. Nye learned his stories of cattle drives, of empty nights, of a home that had never truly been full. They did not rush what grew between them. Trust, he discovered, was stronger when earned slowly. Sometimes Illy dreamed of his old cabin and woke with the smell of smoke in his nose. Other times he woke to the sound of Nanty's quiet breathing and felt something he had never known before, belonging. He had crossed into a world that would never fully claim him and left one that would never take him back. Yet, under the wide sky between two ways of life, Illy understood the truth at last. The day he came home and found a stranger in his bed was not the end. It was the beginning.